Welcome to the Organizational Transformation Kung Fu Podcast with your hosts, Sandi Verrecchia and Jennifer Long.
Hello, and welcome to another jam-packed, fun-filled edition of Organizational Transformation Kung Fu, or OT Kung Fu, as Sandi and I like to call it. I'm Jen Long from Own Up in Denver, Colorado, and I am here with my colleague and master coach, Sandi Verrecchia from Satori Consulting in Toronto, Canada. How's it going, Sandi? You're wearing a turtleneck. It looks like it's colder there than it is in Denver.
It is April and we had snow today.
It is April and we are coming up on 60 some odd degrees in Denver.
It is crazy. It is crazy.
It is. Welcome to spring.
Yeah.
We are going to do some Kung Fu, which is some time and discipline around the idea of critical thinking and complex problem solving in this edition of the podcast, because this is an issue that comes up a lot from a coaching perspective when we're working with leaders and we're working with leadership teams, that everybody's working at speed and under pressure. And sometimes when you're doing the strategies and you're making the plans and you're trying to get the team to move forward, you're not doing enough work around stress testing the plans. You're not doing enough work around thinking longer and deeper around the possibilities and the potentials and things of this nature. And so we're going to dive into both of these topics by virtue of having read a book called Red Teaming: How Your Business Can Conquer the Competition by Challenging Everything by Bryce G. Hoffman. Okay, Sandi, book report time.
There we go.
We each have our copy. It's all
Yes.
good. Yes.
Yeah. I think the other piece of that is around business is stress testing the plan when it's made, but also going back and stress testing it along the way. Right? A lot of times we build strategic plans and they're lovely documents, and we feel that we need to follow them all the way along, and that's not the case. Not in today's VUCA world, right? With the volatility and all the uncertainty that's going around us, we have to be constantly testing it. And red teaming has many different ways of testing the plan as we go. So what is red teaming?
What is red teaming?
Yeah.
Let's start with what is red teaming. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is a way of really looking at how we're making decisions and other ways of looking at it. So it's all sorts of different tactics to get into looking at things differently and testing the limitations of our human decision making and looking at things differently in a way that maybe we haven't in the past. And there's all sorts of biases that gets in that. We're going to talk about it. It is, they talk a lot about in the book about how organizations are set up almost to fail in this regard because of the hierarchy of them. Right? We don't challenge when somebody above us says, this is how we're going to do something, because, I need to feed my family and I need to feed my dog and I like to go to work every day. And that's a limitation, right? And red teaming, when done right, is one of those things that can set those limitations aside in a respectful way and dig a little deeper.
Exactly. So fundamentally, it's a mindset about how you think about planning and executing plan and actually doing strategy. So it's a mindset and it's a tool set, right? So there's a lot of descriptions of tools and how you might use these tools in specific certain situations or during what kind of plans and that thing. So it's those two things fundamentally. And its roots are based on tradecraft from the intelligence services, right? That this isn't something that is, it's been around, and the Army, the U.S. Army concocted this idea, built some of these tools, and the book, what Bryce's genius is that he's been able to, he's gone through their training and he has found the business applications So that is the nature of the book itself, is to take what the intelligence community has been using to devise plans and strategies and put it into a business context.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I found fascinating in the book, in his sort of his military context, was how they used it around 9/11. So on September 12th, they put a red team together, and a red team is different from red teaming. A red team is a group of people that will do some red teaming, but the red teaming are the exercises. But because they had so much of the intelligence already, that had they stopped and done some of this red teaming in advance, they may have been able to stop it from happening, the 9/11 from happening. And that since then, apparently, that they have stopped many attempts, because they now have these people that are forward thinking and outwardly thinking and thinking differently and thinking about possibilities and poking holes and things like that.
Right.
So
I mean,
that's good news.
the contention, right? The contention is that there's no such thing as a black swan. That really, if you're good at challenging your assumptions, at pressure testing your plans, at really kind of looking at alternative perspectives and generating better options as you do your plans and strategies, that you can see it coming, right? You should never be in a position where you didn't see it coming. You might not get it right 100%, but you should all be close.
Yeah, yeah. What it's not a silver bullet, right? You're not going to apply one of these mind exercises and get in a room with people and things are going to be absolutely perfect. It's also not an excuse for not moving forward, because we have to red team more, and we have to red team more, and we have to red team more. It's also not a tool to be cynical or dark when anybody gives a solution or brings something forward, right? Because things can get that way. So we want to make sure that we're doing it in the spirit of getting things better.
Doing it right, find a solution moving forward,
right.
Not where's the wet blanket? Let's throw that on it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, it's not just for really large companies or companies like the Air Force that they're big and they're dealing with big, huge, complex issues on a daily basis. It can be right sized for any organization, depending, because we're all dealing with different things, and the magnitude is really dependent on the company. And the magnitude to my company may feel huge, which may feel small to somebody other company, but again, that continuum of scale is important.
Yeah. If you're making a plan and executing a plan, you can red team it.
yeah, exactly. But do we red team everything? What do you think?
We do not. We do not need to red team everything, because there are some things that. So there's the book presents this lovely framework that I use in my leadership development training called the Cynefin framework. And that's spelled, it's a Welsh word, what is it? Cynefin.
Mm-hmm.
Am I spelling it right?
It looks like it's Cynefin, but it's Cynefin.
Like Cynefin, but it's Cynefin is how you say it. And it's a quad chart. And the quad chart talks about it's an approach to problem solving. It's a tool to look at and say, what kind of a problem am I solving? And the bottom right starts with simple, and then it goes upper right is complicated, upper left is complex, and lower left is chaos. And there's a center point in the quad chart, which is what is the word that he uses? It's basically, you don't know. You're not thinking about it, and you haven't determined, right? You haven't determined what kind of problem you're dealing with. And if you live in the undetermined circle in the middle, then what happens to you is you tend to problem solve based on your preferred style of problem solving. So if you're a systems engineer, you're always going to go into a systems engineer problem solving mindset. And what the framework's meant to say is that not everything should be solved in the same manner. Just because what you're good at or familiar with is useful doesn't mean that that's what your problem wants relative to what you're trying to work with, right? So the red teaming book looks at that and says, a simple simple things are the obvious answers, right? So those kinds of problems are the things that you're like, well, yeah, the light went out, so replace the light bulb or turn the
Yeah.
light on or whatever it is, right? Versus if it's complicated, and complicated being there is an expert, someone knows, right?
The
And
answer.
the analogies are like your car breaks down. There are a lot of mechanics out there who can probably fix your car. They may not all do it the same way, but they're good at it and they know and they can figure it out and fix it, right? And that's the difference between simple and complicated. When you get into complex, that's where it's unknown. And the whole system, there are a lot of things at play, and there may not be a pattern, and you sort of have to sense your way in. And so instead of getting an expert in complicated, you're doing a lot of sensing and trying and seeing what happens. And that's where red teaming is really, really impactful, because it helps you really clarify and codify what you're sensing is on all the unknowns, right? Putting names on things and trying to help you create a better plan of action to test it out.
Yeah. And then chaos, when there's so many things coming at us and we really don't know, have no idea where things may land, right? Again, red teaming is a great thing for that, in terms of what are the possibilities? Like, what might happen? And if we don't do anything,
Right.
what might happen?
Yeah. And chaos is about the immediacy, right? So how do we act? How do we move out quickly? Because there's urgency there, right? And so you just act. Yeah.
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 And so one of the things that you touched on was, really getting to know what it is that you're trying to solve. And often we're not solving the right thing, or we haven't really defined what it is that we need to solve. And that's really at the top of the house, getting clear on what it is that you're trying to solve.
Well,
Things
getting
become a
clear,
little clearer.
and when you're working with a leadership team, is getting aligned around a problem.
Alignment.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the big light bulbs when you read through red teaming is just the idea of the question, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And how that question, if you, and Bryce introduces an exercise called Think, Write, Share, where he'll put on the table, like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And everyone needs to write it down. And how often when everyone frames the problem and then you read out, right? So once you write it
You
down,
pass it around.
force you to think through, you kind of pass them around, and then you read out what everybody writes down as this is the problem we're trying to solve. And you'll find out right then and there that everybody sees it differently.
Yeah.
Which is its own discussion.
Well, I did this exercise back in the fall of last year, and it was really telling. There's some laughter in the room. There's some aha in the room, but having to write it down means that cognitively you have to think through something before yelling it out, because there is that bias that comes across. The first person that says something in the room, often people will follow that as the gospel truth. And so to get through that, this Think, Write, Share is a really good exercise to stop that from happening.
Well, the passing it around makes me think about the rules, right? We didn't talk about the rules. And I love that he puts the rules at the back of the book. Where when you engage in this whole process, that there are rules of red teaming, and this whole idea of everyone speak once before anyone speaks twice.
Yes.
Right. So Think, Write, Share is just the embodiment of you all have to think. And then because you pass the things around, everyone's voice gets heard because they're going to read out your card. So all the thinking gets heard before there's discussion. And that's a really key concept in how this teaming actually gets done well.
Yeah, because it doesn't squash your thought process, right? Because how many times have you been in a room where you wanted to say something and you didn't say it, or somebody said something and I did, I'm not going to add to it. By passing it around, because everything gets read out, whether it's the same or different, you're not passing over the opportunity to say, maybe my idea isn't a good idea. And so it puts everything out there, and it's amazing. And so when we did this, we were able to create alignment, but it was really interesting how different the answers were on what problem we were trying to solve in that particular session. So that's a really good
Right.
one.
Yeah. And it thwarts the rank hierarchy, right? So if you've got somebody who is of a different, you got the lead team, CEO,
Mm-hmm.
whoever, if, what they say, people tend to give that different weight, right? And so these things are really designed to kind of flatten the whole experience intentionally so
Yeah.
that people who tend to talk more, carry more weight and influence, all that stuff gets
Mm-hmm.
designed out based on how you engage these tools, which I think is a
Yes.
absolutely great idea. And Bryce also talks about that you can do these with leadership teams, but sometimes the best red teams are the teams that aren't those people who are so highly invested, is that you red team the output of the senior team
Which is
and
not an
report
easy
back.
thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to have such an open uh, culture around this to allow that to happen, for it to actually flourish. Because if it's not, he talks about the fellow from Ford a lot, and how he created this culture of, we want you to come forward with your ideas. We want you to not criticize, but look for different ways of doing things. And but you have to have a culture of that. It can't be something that you just say, go in and here's our strategic plan, director
Right.
level, please shoot all the holes in it, because you're not going to get good feedback. Because again,
The
we all want to
degree of
feed our kids.
psychological safety has to be there.
It has to be there.
It has to be set up in such a way that, and it's interesting. And so, spoiler alert, I've been working on a certification for these tools. So I've been sitting through experiences and whatnot, and had a team of red team instructors go in to work with a team. And one of the tools that is in the part of the pack is something called the lies we tell ourselves. And I don't know if that's in the book or not. Is it in there? I can't remember.
I don't think it's in the book, but it's certainly in their intro class.
Yes. And so that whole, and the lies we tell ourselves is an exercise to say, what are the things, what are the hard truths that we are not facing, it's a way to unearth that. And the fact that some of these hard truths and the fact that we don't deal with them is holding us back as an organization. So it's, what are the lies we tell ourselves that are holding us back? And it's an interesting conversation to have. And it's a great way to start red teaming, because it kind of helps you start to understand how you get mired down in a lot of untruths, and how you don't think about it, and how you accept things and go with bias and satisficing and all those kinds of things. So the story is, they went in there was a focus on the whole red teaming, and they went into focus on artificial intelligence as kind of the thing they were going to red team around, to get strategy, to look at their strategy around that. And they started with, let's just start as a warm-up exercise to walk through this and kind of get things. Let's start with the lies we tell ourselves about artificial intelligence, and as a launching point. And the interesting thing is, the team started with the lies we tell ourselves. Their responses were about, in general, in the company right now, that's what's holding us back. And the CEO was part of this whole experience. And when the groups all come back together, they were not ready, right? They were not ready or he wasn't ready for the outcome of what came out of that group. And so the need to understand the power of the tools, how fast it will surface things, how meaningful that information is, you really want to be ready. These aren't teaming, toughest skills you ever do, right? Just as a coach, I'll tell you, to add this level of critical thinking and problem solving into a teaming environment, you got to double down on the trust and the psychological safety, because you have to be able to talk about all the hard truths and realities and what ifs without personalizing all the things.
Yeah. One of the ways I get around that, especially if the team has low trust, is to have them send me the lies first. And then I read them out, and I don't attribute them to anyone. And then we can have an open dialogue. So it's not, Bob saying this, it's, somebody said it, and maybe it's Bob, but, so it takes away sort of the personalness, the personalizing of it, I guess. And anyway,
it doesn't tell you who said it. But the fact that it
Right, but
got
it puts it
said,
out there.
right.
Yeah.
And that is because and that's really, note to leader. If you're going to go in and try this, because these are really powerful tools. If you're going to go in and try it, just be prepared for what comes from your red team, and that's, especially if you're doing let's have someone else who doesn't have skin in the game really red team it, because it's more objective, less bias lives in the red teaming when it's not your own strategy. But when they report out, when the results come, that's the point at which you have to really be like, ooh, so glad I did this, as opposed to holy crap.
Yeah, and not get into defense mode, right? Because now it becomes personal. And when we did this last exercise with the one CEO, he was brilliant. I really had to commend him after, because as difficult as it was to hear the things that he was hearing, and he could have gone either way. He could have taken it personally and shut the meeting down, right? Sort of had the right to, I guess, being the CEO, but didn't, and embraced it. And just talk about building trust. That's just one of the things that started building back trust, because of the graciousness in which he received the information. So again, psychological safety and trust, super important when you're using these really weighty tools sometimes.
Exactly. I'm looking at this. There's a couple pages in here where he talks about how to create a red team, right? And red teaming. So optimum size for a red team between 5 and 11 people.
5 and 11. Yeah.
So they're small. They're not a giant cohort of individuals. And
we need
there's
diversity
a variety
on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity on it. And then you can't. Yeah, definitely. We talk about diversity in organizations all the time. This is a great way to sort of lean into the diversity
and leverage
of people.
This is where you really reap the benefit of leveraging that, because through the use of the tools, you can't not get that benefit, which I think is awesome. I thought that the qualifiers that he included on this was interesting, right? And not just the diversity, but good analytical and critical thinking skills, close attention to detail, the ability to think outside the box. And then he went on to say that they need the confidence and assurance to challenge the status quo, as well as the self-awareness required to recognize their own biases and limitations. They should also be intellectually honest and able to resist the pressures of organizational politics. Not a light ask.
And we need 5 to 11 of them.
And we need 5 to 11 of them who are willing to put their careers on the line. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a key thing. If you've got somebody in there who's a political animal and knows how they think and understands their bias and has an agenda, like, it's going to pollute the whole thing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to note about whole red teaming is that it's not a process. It's not a check the box exercise that you could say I've done this. It's a practice. It's something that needs to be done over and over and over again. We've woven through everything that you're doing in terms of decision making, depending on whether it's needed at whatever various levels of decision making you're doing. But it becomes something that becomes almost matter of fact within an organization and part of your culture, rather than, now we're going to have this structured approach to do something and everything that we do. And we've seen that in organizations all the time, right? Everybody has a great idea and all of a sudden we put a framework around it and we have to sort of fit ourselves into the framework. And red teaming is not that.
No, it's really a lever you pull when you need to check in on, is our plan good? Is it, before you engage and spend the resources on executing a plan? Those sorts of things. It's timely and useful. And so, in dealing with strategic plans, just in general, so many organizations are like, it's an offsite. We do it once a year. We have this thing. Whereas if you're really doing strategy well, you are meeting to do strategy. Right? It's not just the thing at the offsite. You may spend 2 days to kick off to really think about the next year, the 12 to 18 months, but really looking at that, what are the opportunities we're trying to seize on? And at the same time, what is the most important problem we need to solve to be able to realize the value of those opportunities. And it's that polarity and that combination, it's not really a polarity, that combination of things in a cadence,
Yeah.
right?
And
And
a
to
regular
really,
cadence.
this is a great tool set to marry to that endeavor.
Yeah.
So if you want to, high performance your strategy, then this is a great tool set.
Yeah, for sure. And the book is what, 200 pages maybe? It's an easy read.
It's really a quick read, but Sandy and I were also talking about, so the thing it does is it drives, and we talked about systems 1 and systems 2.
Yes, I love it.
Thinking, because groups don't live. We live in system 1, and system 1 is automatic, intuitive, and instinctual.
Yeah,
it's our default
raining,
mode.
I need an umbrella, right?
Yes.
I go to a meeting, I have to say one thing. Right?
Right?
It's how we live our day. The stove is hot, don't touch. That is all system 1, and we live there all the time.
Right. And when we've been in an organization for a long time, we have experiences in there, and when we get into the problem solving and the what do we want to do in our plan, we can live in system 1 and not really think about that, not really realize that we're just, well, obviously we're going to do this, and obviously we're going to do that, because that's right. Our mind just goes there. Too many bowling balls otherwise. I'm sorry, that's a metaphor that comes from, do I need to explain too many bowling balls? Does that make sense?
I would say I've never heard it. Not being a bowler and all.
Yeah. There's this guy, Don Miller, who's written a bunch of books on marketing and growing your business. And in the marketing sense, when you go to tell people what you do, he's like, you bring them a bowling ball. But then when you start to really get into explaining all the things about what you do and why it's so fantastic, you're handing them more bowling balls, which is making them think too hard. And so he's like, too many bowling balls. You only want one. So when I get into 2 levels of when it gets too complex, my metaphor is always too many bowling balls. My brain is having to work way too hard. I'm holding way too much weight. So systems 1, not a bowling ball. It's just, you go there.
It's
systems
just what it is.
2.
Is where we need to go. And at the outset, I was saying how, I do a lot of governance work working with boards, and the age-old question is, where does operations start and governance start and stop and start, and we're out the board's always getting into operations, and so I've taken on this whole notion of system 2 thinking, saying that's where boards need to sit. They need to sit where they're really engaging their brains to solve problems and ask dynamic questions, and not get into the everyday vanilla of things. That's what's needed. And so that's from a board perspective, absolutely. And then from a strategy perspective, same thing. We need to be able to engage our brains at a higher level in order to think through things that are more complex. If you don't, you end up with the same old, or a plan that is, mediocre at best.
Exactly. It's not innovative. It's not groundbreaking. It doesn't really solve your problem.
Yes. Yeah. And our brains are really lazy, right? You have to think system 2. It's not an automatic thing. So you really engage some of these tools to get you there, so that you can employ it. And it's hard to stay in that space. So having, again, that safety in the room of saying, I think we're sliding back, is an important aspect.
Exactly. And that's the work of the red teaming, right? The tools force you down into systems 2 thinking. And what I find when you use these exercises, you can only do so much at a time, because mentally it's tiring. So you can do a couple, 3 hours of this, and then you're like, okay, we gotta take a break.
Yeah. Which sort of leads me to why organizations wouldn't do this sort of exercise, right? Because, well, maybe you're looking at me like, why wouldn't they? But, it takes time, right? It takes energy. And, if your top producing people are the people that you want to have on red teams, then they're not out producing, right? So you think about, so that there's the reward and the cost of doing that sort of thing. So organizations may shy away from it because of the time and the effort that it takes away from the actual doing of the business.
Right. Right. It's funny because it's really, we all whine about the fact that we don't have enough critical thinking and there isn't enough people who understand the ripple
Yeah.
effect and the causes and the impacts of their decisions and yada, 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 which are all those things. And that's all systems two thinking, right? So what we're saying is we don't have enough systems two thinking. And that what we also need to say is we need to create space for that because the impact of it is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And it's one of the hardest things to hire for. When we're looking for
Mhm.
skill sets, when we're hiring, and so it's not taught in schools the way other things are, and so yeah. But I think the absence of not doing it. You can have a vanilla plan,
Mhm.
but I think organizations may shy away from it because of the time commitment that it takes.
Yeah. And it's kind of weird because once they give it a go, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
energy that gets generated there, right? Because
Yeah.
it can be actually kind of fun to do some of these tools and to really, it can be enlightening. It can be so aha, and you can come out actually more energized and thinking in a different way than when you went in. And so it's an interesting give and take, and it's hard, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also, it's like hot yoga. It's hard.
Yeah.
You
Hard.
sweat a lot, but you kind of come out feeling energized.
And down the road, you'll feel better. So, your strategy is going to be better down the road. So that's a great analogy around the hot yoga for sure.
There you go.
You know,
There you go.
and I think with this, I always equate things back to children. And, these things are things that kids do automatically and that we sort of beat it out of them as they get older. And then we want it to them to just like pop back into it when they're into a leadership role. And it's quite actually amazing. Right? Because kids are asking the 5 whys. They're gonna, why you to death until you get to the right answer, which is
Exactly.
one of the tools in his book. But
And we hate
I
the
think
5 whys as
organizations,
parents. Yeah, because
yeah,
it makes you answer why you're doing something at a level that you don't want to deal with.
yeah,
Right? Because it
totally,
really does uncover fundamental things about your strategy and your thinking and your problem solving. And
mm-hmm.
it's a good practice.
Yeah,
What else can we
yeah.
tell them about the book? There's he's really good
That's
at laying the
fantastic.
groundwork, where it comes from, being real clear about
Yes.
what it is, what it takes, who should be in it, how to leverage it. And then there's the meat of the book. He walks you through a lot of different tools and
Mm-hmm.
gives you a little bit of a case story around how they've been used and that. But the short end of is he gives you enough to get you excited, but I don't think you're going to walk away and go, all right, I can do this. Right. You can walk away and do
Absolutely
think,
not.
right, share, but there's these are going to take some training. And what I would tell you, having been working on my training on this for, I don't know, 6-8 months, I don't know how long it's been. Um, there's a lot of tools, and understanding which tools to use when and
Mm-hmm.
about what is the art. And he talks a lot about the art and the science of it. It's as much an art as it is a science, because it seems like, yes, we can use it on the plan, but which one do we use on the plan at what stage?
Mm-hmm.
What's the most appropriate thing based on what we're trying to get done? That's the art part. And the art part is also in the middle of using the tool, right? Are we asking good questions? Can we restate our
Mm-hmm.
questions? Should that question be flipped around? Right? Is this a good place to be a little bit more contrarian about how we're thinking than not? And do you hear and recognize bias in the room? There's a lot of things that go into it that are where the powerful experience gets really good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and like anything, when you use tools, right? Practice it. Practice it. You got to use
Practice.
them, right? If you haven't used your let me go to plumbing now. If you haven't used
Oh,
your
it's
drain snake in 10 years, right? Is that thing rusty, and can you even remember how to unfurl it and put it, like, what the process is?
if you even have a drain snake, Jen.
If you even have a drain snake.
Yeah. No, you're right. And, we talked, Jen kicked us off with the whole art of Kung Fu, which is that practice, right? And keep practicing and things get better and things get easier and they don't seem as clunky and as cumbersome. And that's what red teaming is how do you make it a practice and not a process? there's also an entire chapter on different biases, and there's so many, and they are really interesting in how they can get in the way. So just one thing, if you're going to read something out of the book, that's something that you might want to look at, to see how we show up and what gets in our way.
Yeah, sit in your next planning meeting and just start thinking. How many biases am I hearing in the conversation right now? Right.
Yeah.
And just like things like sunk cost fallacy and
Mm-hmm.
what does he talk about? Hindsight bias, right? The tendency to believe that an event could have been avoided or taken advantage of after it's already occurred. Like under just being bias in that moment. Yeah.
It talks about the curse of knowledge, right? Being already having some of that information, and just because you have the information, then therefore you know it to be true, which is it, right? So then, so there's so many things that
so many things. Negativity. Not to mention,
the ostrich effect.
Yes, I love that. Ignoring trouble, disconfirming evidence. Oh, that's not really going to be a thing.
So I'm going to stick my head in the sand. So it's a great book, not overly large and hard to read. Lots of good thought process in that you can read and think about your organization and how you might be able to use some of the tools, but even starting to shift the culture or the narrative around, are we really thinking enough about our strategic planning, or are we planning and stopping? We need to keep it going. We need to revisit. We need to poke holes. We need to ask, is this the right thing, given the world around us, which we know is dynamic and changing and crazy at any given time. And so our diligence toward planning and revisiting and the like, the game has to be elevated without a doubt.
Right. It's just more rigor, more stress test, and deeper, like, hold all the bowling balls, build muscle there, because that thought muscle and surprising. So as coaches, I'm super excited that this book is out there, and no more complaining about we don't have enough critical thinking. Do the work. Yeah. It's easy to say we don't have it, but what you're really asking for is to create space and to create time to do the thinking muscle work. And Bryce has provided a great framework and really good tools. And so recommend the read to get your head around it. And then obviously you're going to have a deeper dive if you're going to try and drive this. And would love to hear about anybody who's doing it, what they're doing it on, how it's going, what the lessons learned are, and to share that conversation out, because I think part of understanding is here's the tool we used, here's what the situation we used it in, and being able to have those conversations is really, really useful. So if you're bringing it into an organization to be strategic about where you're going to start it, and then how do you share it out? How do you bring that in at a deeper level across an organization is part of your strategy on that.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. That was kind of our first book report, tied into some challenges that we run into on a daily basis.
It made for a noisy podcast. You heard a lot of paper flipping around. So There you go. But what we know is that the best leaders are the best learners, and reading the books, getting your head around new ideas, new tools, new understanding is always part of the game. And so we're going to do another one of these shortly and share that out with you as well. So thanks for listening in.
Thank you.
Share us out, share us with your friends, subscribe, all the things, and we'll talk to you on the next podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Sandi. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for listening. You can check out Sandi's website at satoriconsultinginc.ca. That's SATORI consultinginc.ca. And visit Jen's website at own-up.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.